The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So it's that time of year again where we do something that is either really cool or really annoying for people. And that is, it's the holidays. So technically it's the Christmas season. And one of the things that we do is we run a big chunk of episodes. It varies. Like some years we do the 12 days of Christmas. Some years we do 25 days of Christmas, maybe even a bonus episode. And then we kind of come back for New Year's and take a break after that. But we're kicking that time off because my experience with the holidays is that it's a time of year where a lot of people either have to deal with family or they have some time off work that like makes them potentially feel more alone. And I thought having an episode a day for a period of time was kind of like one sort of cool way to connect with people. Particularly, I think I realized about 2 or 3 years ago that people who produce content don't produce as much around Christmas that's not really Christmas oriented. And I know that some people do like a lot of Christmas time true crime stories, and I don't do that per se, but I do try to like come up with a theme, and I usually come up with that theme very early in the year and start collecting stories or information. And it sort of starts as like a group of links that I make a note to myself, like this is an idea I have. And, you know, sometimes I switch topics because I don't find enough of like one underlying theme. And I thought this year, sort of the way my brain works is I was thinking about, it can feel a little bit like a hostage situation when you're having the holidays. And I sort of ran with that. For people who may be with in-laws that they really only see once or twice a year, or people who may be traveling to see family that they don't normally spend much time with. I thought that a good theme or an interesting theme would be to tell stories about hostage takings that have happened throughout the years. And at first I wasn't sure that I would have enough that were that interesting, but at some point I got to like 30 ideas, and I was like, well, that seems like it's going to be enough stories that I can put those into a series of episodes about. But I thought I would kick off the holiday season with sort of one of those stories that seems like it's set in another time. And it really is only taking place 12 years ago, but it feels like it's taking place a really, really long time ago. And as I read some of the details of the story, I was sort of like, what is happening? Because things were brought up. At one point, they mentioned that the perpetrator in the story is from a particular time war-wise. And I was like, but he's only this old. If he were alive today, he'd be in his 70s. So it's kind of a bizarre story. And just to lay the groundwork for this, I pulled from a couple of sources down at al.com, which is literally just al.com. Specifically, the section that you would find this in would be circa 2013 in the Montgomery section of al.com. I pulled from CBS News. They had several interesting 2020 articles by Caroline Summers and Iris Carreras, where they were talking about the FBI and some of the things the FBI had to do with this case, but sort of in context of FBI profiling, how it works with hostage taking and kidnapping. So I pulled from there. I also pulled from WDHN, and the articles that I pulled from there are not as old as you would think. They were published in January and February of 2022. A guy named Mike Gersman wrote there. And I pulled heavily from an article by a gentleman named Michael Phillips. Michael Phillips wrote for the Wall Street Journal, and the article that I pulled from, I don't remember it having a date. It's one of their long form articles with like an intro series and then a lot of information. I think it's from 2014 or so. I confirmed it's still available on the Wall Street Journal site. And I think the main title for it was Inside an FBI Hostage Crisis. And when I looked at it, it was further confirmation that it kind of feels like you're living at a different time, like as all of this is happening. But the story today is, it's called The Bunker Hostage Crisis. It took place in January of 2013. So, coming up on 13 years ago. And it involves a man named Jimmy Lee Dykes. What Michael Phillips wrote about him is pretty interesting. It says there was nobody in Jimmy Lee Dykes' life to take the edge off of his anger. He had long ago lost touch with an ex-wife and 2 daughters. His older daughter recalled his fondness of firearms and a hatred of authorities, how he smelled of spearmint, coffee, and cigarettes, and how he beat her mother. Jimmy Dykes was a Vietnam veteran. He had worked as a land surveyor and a truck driver. He was fired from his last hauling job after a dispute with his boss, and at the age of 65, he ended up living on the edge of a peanut field in a town of 2,400 in southeastern Alabama, growing his own vegetables and collecting grievances. Metal cattle gates opened to his acre-and-a-half property located at the crest of a rutted red dirt road. He landscaped with cinder block and laid out a pond and a garden. Mostly, though, his land resembled a scrub-covered parking lot for his maroon and silver Econoline van, a 40-foot shipping container, and up on blocks, his home, which is a scruffy trailer left over from a federal disaster relief program. In jeans and a t-shirt, with lightning strike white hair, Mr. Dykes roamed his property shooting grasshoppers with a pellet gun. He talked about putting out bowls of antifreeze to poison neighborhood dogs that soiled his property. In early 2012, Mr. Dykes drove his next-door neighbor, Michael Creel, to the Walmart and spent the ride fuming over a new gun law. On the return trip, Mr. Dykes mused about taking people hostage in a church some Sunday until a reporter broadcast his views against the law. Mr. Creel told Mr. Dykes no one would listen to a man taking hostages. The 2 men drove home in stony silence. A sheriff's deputy once intervened in a spat over Mr. Dykes' claim to pecans that fell on the roadside from another man's tree. For Mr. Dykes, the confrontation was one more complaint against a world that had done him wrong and was too stupid to know it. All the boys at the top, they shit on all the people at the bottom, is what Mr. Dykes told the deputy. In 2012, Mr. Dykes hired Mr. Creel to help dig an underground bunker. The 2 men spent weeks clawing through dense red clay. They lined the walls with joists and wood panels, and Mr. Dykes worked from dawn till dusk on what he told Mr. Creel was a storm shelter. He talked about surviving hurricanes down in Florida. When they were done, Mr. Dykes asked Mr. Creel to climb inside. "Scream real loud," said Mr. Dykes. "I want to see if I can hear you." And then he walked away. Mr. Creel figured his neighbor wanted to see if yelling would bring help should a tree fall and block the hatch on top of the bunker. He found it odd that Mr. Dykes seemed pleased. Voices couldn't penetrate the thick earth. Over the years, Mr. Dykes had been arrested for drugs, drunken driving, assault, and larceny. He was due in court on January 30th, 2013 to face a misdemeanor charge. He had built a speed bump, hopefully to slow down a neighbor's sports car. It was an obstacle that led to a confrontation and allegations that Jerry Dykes brandished a firearm. Mr. Dykes didn't show up for his court date. Instead, he boarded a school bus, grabbed a boy, and carried him down to his bunker. So this is a fascinating one for me. The reason it's fascinating to me is because it kind of defies all the reasons that you would typically think about somebody having had a bunker on their property. I think I exclusively think of more sex crime related reasons.
Yeah, and I think of trying to like hide out from like a bomb or a tornado or natural disaster.
Yeah, I guess I should have clarified that I was thinking of like what terrible
Crimes.
thing would a criminal use a bunker for. So Jimmy Dykes, he's a decorated Vietnam War veteran from the Navy. They say he lives in isolation, but I found a lot of evidence across the internet in a lot of different articles with a lot of people talking about their interactions with them in a way that law enforcement seems to confirm. So he definitely is talking to some people, but I think what they mean by the isolation part is that when he loses contact with his daughters, he does not reconnect to them. The thing about that is, for people to know that and tell us that after the fact, they had to know him a little bit. And this is all according to people who lived and interacted with him.
Well, just the short sort of entry you gave about his trip to Walmart with his neighbor, right?
Yeah.
I have a feeling it might not have been all up to him, right? Because you're telling somebody, don't take people hostage.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times are you going to have to tell them that? Like, you're not going to be around that person, right?
Right. So, as it's mentioned in the intro there, he previously lived down in Florida. He was arrested there for brandishing a gun in 1995. So that's going to be a full 18 years ahead of the time frame we pick up with. In 2000, he had been arrested for marijuana possession charges. He had moved to a place called Midland City. And while he's in Midland City, he beat a neighbor's dog to death with an iron pipe.
Now, I gotta step in here. You said earlier that he put bowls of antifreeze out to poison dogs that were using his land, and he's beating a dog to death. And I gotta tell you, of all the signs that you can see in people that there's something really, really wrong with them, beating a dog to death is really high up there.
Yeah, it's absolutely a terrible sign that something is seriously wrong with a person. Don't you think?
I do. I think, and it's something that we can all look at it and know it's wrong. And I would obviously try to stop it if I saw it happening, but I'm not sure that we can really get deep down in there and understand it. Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that even the goal of this 45 minutes to an hour episode story that we're doing is going to uncover the actual motives for somebody like Jimmy Dykes, who seems to be a walking contradiction. And I say that because digging through all of this information that is available about him, and like there's a pretty thorough investigation done to him, because it's kind of rare for the FBI to invade a 2,400 person town. But they do. They do invade a 2,400 person town, but they're specifically there looking for Jimmy Dykes. But among all that information is, in addition to having beat a neighbor's dog to death, and as I just said, putting the speed bump in to stop like the guys with sports cars that are driving down through there. And he's known to have patrolled his property at night with a shotgun and a flashlight. He's known to have harmed animals. He has warned children not to come on his land. And at the same time, he has cleared a path on his property that school buses can take to go through.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't at all. But on the afternoon of Monday, January 28th, even though court's on January 30th, we've got, and that's for sentencing in the what is a menacing case or a brandishing of a firearm case. We have this incident happening on January 29th, but on Monday, January 28th, while the school bus driver is driving down the highway, and he turns off at Destiny Church, which is this little sort of prefab metal building that's got a steeple kind of attached to it. He takes his bus down what's known as Private Road 1539 through the Red Dirt Road, and he is attempting to drop off the kids who live down here. And then he backs up into a driveway, and that driveway is owned by Jimmy Dykes, who's recently cleared it. And Jimmy Dykes, on this Monday, he approaches the door, and Chuck Poland thanks him for making room and clearing the trees in the turnaround. And Jimmy Dykes says, well, I figured you'd appreciate it. He says, hey, do you like broccoli and carrots? And the driver says, I like broccoli. And Mr. Dykes says, all right, I'll catch you tomorrow. So this driver's name is Chuck Poland. Chuck Poland served as a U.S. Army helicopter mechanic. He's around the same age as Jimmy Dykes. He's 66 years old at the time that he's driving this bus. He's a stocky guy. He has a beard. He's a grandfather. At night, he would watch footage from the bus security cameras, and he would make notes of which students were doing what so that he could pay attention to them, outside of his driving. He didn't want to be distracted. He would turn them in if they had multiple transgressions or if they were bullying against some other kid. So he's riding along that day, and he says the kids were talking about seeing Mr. Dykes, and he explained to them, he dug that while they were on Christmas break, he had dug out these trees and cleared this area so that we'd be able to turn around. So according to Chuck Poland's wife, Chuck had told her that he seemed like a man who just needed a friend. So Tuesday, January 29th, Chuck Poland left a dozen fresh eggs and a jar of homemade muscadine grape jelly in the front seat of Mr. Dykes' van, along with a note. And that note said, sorry, I missed you. I'll see you later. There's a photo of it online. It's actually a pretty long note. It says, hi there, I am Chuck Poland, the school bus driver. Sorry I missed you, but I left you some eggs and muscadine jelly in the front seat of the van for you. I'll see you later. And he writes his phone number on here and puts phone beside it. And it says Chuck Poland. Mr. Dykes gives this jelly to a neighbor, but he keeps the note in his wallet next to a scrap of paper with phone numbers that the police are going to find later on. And it's going to have phone numbers in there for the White House and the U.S. Senate. And it has a folded receipt for a handgun that had been seized by police in 2000. So 13 years prior to this. At around 3:30 p.m., Chuck Poland, wearing his usual outfit, which included suspenders, again backed up his bus into the turnaround by the laurel oak trees. He saw Mr. Dykes approaching him, carrying a T-shirt bag full of broccoli. So Chuck opens the door, and Mr. Dykes, wearing his blue jeans and a baseball cap, climbs aboard. But instead of handing him the bag of broccoli, he pulls out a pistol. He hands Mr. Poland a neatly printed letter that begins, I have a story to tell. It ordered Mr. Poland to select 2 well-behaved boys that had no mental or physical problems and to cuff them together using black zip ties. The letter continued, no harm will come to the kids. When the story is finished, they will go free and I will die. But Mr. Dykes in the letter promised consequences if Chuck Poland refused. I don't want to shoot you. I want 2 kids, 6 to 8 years old, right now. So then he said it out loud to the driver. He said, I mean it, right now, 2 kids, 6 to 8, get it, make a move, I'll shoot you if you don't do it. Mr. Poland, in a very even voice, said, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to shoot me. The children ducked down behind the seats, and they were quietly trying to see what was happening. Trey Watts, a 16-year-old on the bus, was in the second to last row. He was playing NBA Jam on his iPhone, and he called 911. Britton Norris, the operator, picked up and said, where is your emergency? Trey told Britton, we're on the bus, and someone is trying to take our kids. To which she responded, somebody on the bus is trying to take a kid? Trey said, yes, ma'am. So Mr. Dykes, with a pistol in one hand and zip ties in the other, he used his hand to summon several children forward. A boy in red, a girl in the back seat, but no one moved. So he turned to Ethan Gilman. Ethan Gilman was a 5-year-old boy. He was considered impulsive and easily distracted. According to his mother, he was autistic. He would sit up front to be near Mr. Poland. Ethan was heavy for his age. He was frightened of the stairs. Come here, come on, Jerry Dykes yelled at Ethan. He's scared to death, said Chuck Poland. You will not be harmed, son. Come on. Mr. Poland stayed in his seat, but he wouldn't let anyone move. Dykes said, I'm going to have to shoot you now. And then he yelled, go on, I don't have any time. The goddamn law is coming. Go on. And Mr. Poland said, in a steady and quiet voice, I can't do it. Jerry Dykes at this point fired one shot. Mr. Poland cried out, and the bus rolled backward through the trees, shadows fluttering over the seats. 4 seconds later, Jerry Dykes fired another shot, then 3 more. Mr. Poland slumped against the side window, blood seeping through his t-shirt, and the bus suddenly stopped. The 911 operator heard children scream. What's going on, she asked Trey. And Trey said, the bus driver's dead. Britton said, the what? And Trey repeated, the bus driver's dead. All she could think of to do was to say, hang in there, baby, hang in there, just get down. Mr. Dykes pulled Ethan from his seat and wrestled him down the bus stairs. He hoisted the boy onto his shoulder and disappeared. I want my mommy, cried one of the girls. So that is what gets us to this hostage-taking crisis.
And what a crazy situation.
Like, what is he thinking?
Well, and I can only imagine. So I like to put myself in like everybody's place, right? So all these kids are going, well, what's this dude doing on the bus, right?
Right.
Got a gun. Then the 911 operator, I know this sounds bad, but like some of the most interesting calls are the ones where the operator that answers immediately has to have the person repeat themselves.
Right.
Because it's something that they've never been trained for. They can't even fathom the situation, right?
Right.
And I do understand, it would, for one thing, it was probably confusing because a bus is typically transporting kids, and for it to be stopped and somebody to get on, that's a weird, it doesn't happen very often, I wouldn't imagine, right? But there was this sort of setup here where he had cleared for the bus to turn around, and then, Chuck Poland had, very graciously tried to be a friend, right?
He had, yep.
And so that's what, and obviously to me, that is Dykes setting up a situation where it's not odd for him to stand up and get on the bus, right?
Right.
Because he's going to give him some broccoli or whatever. So this is, the wheels turning in Dykes' head to get it to happen. And then we've got this 16-year-old who immediately calls 911, which is another thing that if you think back to other hostage situations that happened in different times and places, that wouldn't have even been an option, right?
Right.
To have a kid on the bus with a cell phone. But he immediately knew something was wrong. There are children on the bus, and that takes front and center, but I can only imagine what Chuck Poland thought.
Well, I mean, there's, 21 kids on this bus.
Right.
And ultimately, that guy refusing to participate in what Jimmy Lee Dykes is trying to do probably saves some of these kids. He gets away with the one kid, but that's really because he kills Chuck Poland.
That's the only reason. He knew he wasn't going to be able to take a child with him sitting there. Now, the interesting thing to me is I have a feeling because we have sort of an insight from Chuck Poland's wife that he thought he was a man that just needed a friend, right? Yeah. I have a feeling that's why he didn't just, from the position he was sitting in as the driver of the bus, just kick him right back out the door, right? Yeah. Because I don't think he thought it was going to escalate. Yeah. Even because, people talk, right? People say, I'm going to do this, that, or the other. And I have a feeling he was looking for a nonviolent end to that situation. He was probably surprised, right, that he actually did shoot him. But when you look at they were the same age, so he wouldn't have seen an older man, but he would have seen somebody that he could probably, he thought he would have stuff in common with, right?
He probably empathized with him too, yeah.
Exactly. And so I think it just escalated really fast. Now, we can't ignore the irony of the note asking for two basically no medical problems and well-behaved, I think 6 to 8 year old children. And he gets a 5-year-old who has like ADHD or autism or something, right?
Right.
Because that's irony.
Yeah, I've seen the ADHD reported. I've seen autism. I've seen Asperger's. I've seen multiple things reported.
And I think every single person who, if you went to school in like the 80s and 90s, which this was in 2013, so it was only 12 years ago, but I know kids that I went to school with that had those problems. And even if it wasn't said out loud, you know exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah, you do. And it's interesting. So we have this description of Michael Creel talking about what Dykes is doing. And clearly that's when they're building the bunker. So that's ahead of this happening. I will say one of the interesting things about this is the timing of the world. And to give you like that's one of my favorite things to do is like to give you an idea of what's happening in the world. About a month before this, you have the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. So that's December 14th, 2012. Fresh on the mind of people is the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right, because that was a big deal.
And then, earlier in 2012, you have the Aurora, Colorado shooting in a movie theater.
The Batman movie, right.
So you have James Holmes at the Batman movie premiere. So that's another type of mass shooting. My point is, for like a solid year, the previous year, and that's why these like assault gun bans and other laws are being bandied about in 2012. Right. It's because of incidents in 2011 and 2012. But like we're looking at the aftermath of this, and you have to think about the fact that like we just had something terrible happen up in Newton, Connecticut that like is going to still be on the minds of everyone involved, including law enforcement.
Not to mention the fact that it gives us a lot of insight into the thought that this plan that he is right now in our story going through with, it has something to do with trying to get a gun law not happening.
Yeah, he's doing something where
But it gives you insight. Like, he doesn't understand a lot of dynamics, right?
I'm going to take a guess that probably at this point they talk about the pistol receipt being in his wallet, and it's 13 years earlier. My guess is the gun law he's pissed about, while he's talking about a gun law that's on the radio with Michael Creel, I think he's probably mad about the gun law that if you're convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, because I don't see felonies in here, but I don't know that for sure. I am betting that he has some kind of misdemeanor crime of domestic violence with his ex-wife where he was assaulting her and she takes the kids. And that prevents him from being able to purchase a firearm, and that makes him mad.
Right. Except like he's committing a crime with a gun.
He's kind of proving the point of that law in what he's doing here.
Right, but that gives you insight into what kind of mind we're dealing with, right? Because this is, boiling it all down. Essentially, he's trying to put innocent lives at risk to bully legislators or whoever he's trying to get at to do something. It's not going to work. It's almost like negotiating with terrorists, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it's, it's baffling to me that we end up with the one kid, meaning Ethan. By the way, if you go hunting for this, I think I should say this here. There is weirdly video and audio to accompany this. It's no longer in the main portion, I would call, of like the Wall Street Journal site. But the Wall Street Journal article that I pulled from, you can find the archive of it on the Wayback Machine. And in that archive, they have security camera footage of this happening. It takes place from like above the driver's perspective, looking out at all the kids, but like it unfolds in a way that you can listen to the 911 call, you can watch the footage. And that is fascinating that we're able to do this with this type of story. But as we tell the story, doesn't it feel like it took place in like another time?
It seems like it would be impossible that a kid had an iPhone they called 911 on, and it would be impossible that there was video on the bus, but just the same, it happened. And to me, it's so barbaric, or I don't know. It's something about it. It just seems like something that would not have happened in 2013, right?
Right. Yeah. And yet it did. So I don't know how much people know about like hostage rescue teams. So I'm going to throw in some statistics there. It's going to become relevant in a minute. Hostage rescue teams, particularly at the federal level, have been around for a really long time. If you look at the bulk of them in the United States, there is no like particular set of statistics attached to how a hostage situation is going to go down, but you can look at the historical averages, and the majority of them last less than 8 hours. But there have been multiple negotiations that have taken place over the course of days. There's a particularly long siege in Waco, Texas, which lasted from February 28th to April 19th of 1993. And that had multiple entries attempted. It had multiple people killed on the federal side. There were multiple lives that were lost. There was a prison riot in 1991 at the Talladega Federal Correctional Institution, or FCI. In that particular riot on August 21st, 1991, Cuban detainees were able to grab a corrections officer and hold him with the threat of being shipped. They took the officer's uniform and they started a prison takeover that would ultimately include 121 detainees and 11 hostages. The leader of the riot told officials at the time that they would be released once a planned deportation of 31 of the detainees was stopped, and other Talladega inmates were allowed to leave the prison. So over the course of the negotiations, the detainees released 2 hostages. There was an injured prison case manager, and there was a prison secretary who had already been ill and attempting to leave work. But after negotiations failed to resolve that situation, and the inmates threatened to start killing the hostages, authorities stormed the unit in the early morning hours, and all of the hostages were ultimately recovered safely. That relied on mostly non-lethal methods, and the 31 Cubans facing deportation saw their deportation accelerated. So,
which is exactly what should have happened, because, I mean, no offense to them, but you can't do things like that, right?
Right. Most of these people were already serving sentences for violent crimes. They had already been through the appellate process, and they were now going to go through the final portion. Right.
And if you give in to any sort of show of force from a hostage situation, you are opening a door you do not want opened.
I agree with that. Now, according to CBS News, the drama here starts pretty quickly, and that is, I say drama, it's really a life-threatening situation for at least the little boy that's been abducted. But Jerry Dykes calls 911. And he gives instructions on how hostage negotiators can communicate with him. He's literally set this up specifically to get his point across.
Right. He had absolutely no interest in taking a small child, but for the ability to force people he thought would do something to do something. That's it. Because the life of the small child was worth it.
Yep.
That's it. He wasn't, there was no ulterior, well, I don't know which way it goes, right? A lot of times hostage situations can happen for a variety of reasons, but he specifically was doing it just to be listened to.
He was. And what's interesting is he had been planning this for weeks, they determined.
Well, yeah, he had to build that bunker.
Yep, he had to build the bunker, and they really wanted to know I think that everyone wanted to know sort of why he was doing this. And then when he gives them this out that they can communicate through what is described as a PVC ventilation pipe. So it's a pipe that was put into the bunker. I believe that it's got an open and close setting so you can turn it off, turn it on. But pretty quickly, he is, surrounded by police and the FBI.
By everybody he wanted to be there.
Right, by everybody. And so the negotiations start out locally, and the first day the FBI arrives. Now, the way this kind of rolls out is they know who they're dealing with. They know that Chuck Poland is dead, and that's a big deal. He ultimately had been blocking access to the children when he was killed, and the first person to come in is local. The hostage negotiator, that is, I don't think he's from like the police force right there. I think he's from the State Bureau. He begins communicating through this 60-foot long plastic ventilation pipe, and he reports back that he thinks the boy is unharmed. He ends up agreeing that the police can send down coloring books, they can send down crayons, and they can send down prescription medication that the boy's mother, when notified, she warned them that they needed, the boy needed some medication. According to neighbors, the bunker had electricity, and they had seen Jerry Dykes disappear and be in this bunker for up to a week at a time. I think, in addition to Sandy Hook, a lot of the things that were on people's minds is there have been some strange hostage takings over the years related to school buses, including the 1976 taking of Chowchilla. Yeah.
Now that is exactly what came to my mind. I'm not actually sure that anything could ever top that, right?
Right.
That just the dynamic of it, like how it was buried and all that stuff that happened, right?
Right.
But in my way, when I was reading about this case, which was this a big deal in mainstream media or no?
It popped for a minute. The one part of it that's a big deal is so this starts happening on January 29th. By about the fourth day of this, it's a huge deal.
Okay, but then it went away again, right? Because there were a lot of things that were overshadowing it as far as gun violence, right?
Correct.
And it's almost like because Chuck Poland did die, but then the child doesn't, and the perpetrator dies, and so it's not like there's a whole bunch of trial stuff and all that stuff, right?
Right.
So it doesn't maintain its position in the spotlight.
Right.
But the Chowchilla case, I didn't know anything about that. I wasn't alive when that happened. But when I learned about it, it was sort of like, what? Right? And so because of that, it seems like any sort of blip on the radar as far as anything having to do with school bus hostage taking, which they didn't even take Dykes didn't even take the school bus here, right? I mean, He took a child off the school bus, but the Chowchilla one, they took the whole school bus, and nothing like that has ever come up again. So it's almost like that is the holy grail of school bus abductions or something.
Right. It is. And so the early reports in this, if you go and read across the internet, they report some of the ages slightly differently. Like Trey is relatively the same age, but he's described as 15 or 16. Ethan Gilman is described as 5 or 6, in the sort of breaking news fashion. But pretty quickly, this rural Alabama area, they end up calling the FBI, and the FBI sends in a team from the Behavioral Analysis Unit to deal with all of this. Now, that would be what people call these analysts. That's their job title. The way that the media refers to them as, quote, profilers. and they are put on the ground to try and bring an end to the situation. A lot of times they come out more for abductions than they do for hostage rescue situations, but they are trained and brought in to analyze situations when there is an active taking, particularly when there's a child involved.
I was going to say, just about anybody, even if you have to use semantics very creatively, they will respond with a 5-year-old, right? I mean,
Right.
Definitely. And in a way, he was abducted.
Right. And even though he's not taken very far, he is squirreled away from the world, particularly from the family that's taking care of him.
Against his will.
Against his will.
Against the bus driver's will, and to the horror of all the children sitting on the bus, right?
Right. And CBS News ends up talking to one of the profilers that's sort of affiliated with this. She's an analyst named Molly Ammon. And Molly Ammon ends up basically describing what they were attempting to do in a few sentences in one of the brief media appearances about this case that they make. And she said that they were essentially trying to bend Jimmy Dykes to their will, and they wanted to figure out how to make him release Ethan. And they characterized Jimmy Dykes as an injustice collector. Are you familiar with that term?
I absolutely am.
So injustice collectors are frequently loners. Sometimes they have other problems going on in their life, and they always seem to find someone else to blame than themselves.
And I will say that the normal inherent human condition, we all have to fight and rally against becoming an injustice collector.
We do.
Because it's natural to hold grudges and to be mad because, things happen that aren't fair, right?
Right. But the general description she gives is that Jimmy Lee Dykes was a loner. She doesn't go as far as to say sovereign citizen, but she kind of describes him as having a strong anti-government mentality, and he's distrustful of everyone. She said that he did lack empathy, and I don't know if that's I don't know if she's leaning towards sociopath. She doesn't come out and say that. The fact that he has no successful relationships in his life and he is lacking in empathy, because I don't think he would take a kid if he had any kind of empathy going on that was functional. I don't know that I would classify him as having full-blown sociopath per se.
Well, right, but he thought this was going to be some sort of statement or solution, so it kind of looks like he is.
Well, but I think he'd already come to the foregone conclusion that he was not going to survive based on the letter he gives Chuck Poland when he gets on the bus. He knew he was not going to survive, so this isn't for him, whatever he's doing, which is sort of defiant against the concept of empathy not existing.
Well, I agree with that, but then you have to wonder, well, I have to wonder, if he knew he wasn't going to survive, why is he doing it?
Well, and it's interesting that you asked that, because we don't ever get a full answer to what's happening here. We get some weird details that come out.
This is pardon the expression, this is a textbook example of a screw loose.
It's a screw loose and it's a cry for help at the same time, and that can have an unusual appearance.
It's a cry for help that he does not expect to be answered, though, because he is committing suicide the long way.
It is kind of the long way, yes. So according to Molly Ammon, they did a deep background on him and interviews with relatives and neighbors and scrutinized very quickly every detail of his life that they could determine. He only had a misdemeanor criminal record that, and as he got older, largely included altercations with his neighbors. And they include the fact that, even in respect to the day that he pulls this stunt, so to speak, he was supposed to be in court very shortly thereafter. Ammon said that they had to study the hostage as carefully as they did the kidnapper. And they point out here in this brief interview in this media piece from CBS that Jimmy Dykes and Ethan would end up in a codependency. And I thought that was interesting that they said it that way. But Jimmy Dykes needs Ethan to live, and Ethan is ultimately his only protection against being taken down from the position that he's in for killing Chuck Poland. And Ethan needs Jimmy Dykes because he was the difference between life and death for someone who is
because he was trapped underground.
Trapped underground, right. So it's a very difficult situation, they said.
But this was all by design.
It is by design, and it is by the perpetrator. Ultimately, this is going to last several days. It is later confirmed that Jimmy Dykes had been requesting, one of his demands was a specific female reporter come and hold his hand while broadcasting with him live from the bunker.
Which is pathetic. That is a pathetic stance to take, and it undermines any sort of, even perceived by his own perception, perceived nobility or whatever he was trying to accomplish. That was pathetic.
Right. But his goal was ultimately, while holding her hand, to commit suicide on live television.
Which is, it just makes it even more so pathetic. I mean, the child and the woman, I mean, come on, man. We're in 2013.
Yeah. There's also some indication, and I'll say this with a grain of salt, because I've seen it on, I think The Boy in the Bunker talked about this. I'm just saying it from the perspective of, I don't have any way to confirm this, and I have not seen anything in writing, but I've heard several people affiliated with the investigation of this case say it. They say that Jimmy Dykes had been training Ethan Gilman to detonate the improvised explosive devices inside of the bunker.
Right. And so he might have successfully done that. A 5-year-old in a very precarious, scary situation, he might have done it. He could have told him all kinds of things to convince him.
Yeah. So it starts on January 29th, and then it ends abruptly on February 4th, 2013 at 3:12 p.m. The FBI's HRT ends up breaching the roof of the bunker using explosive charges after the negotiations have broken down. And quite frankly, they say broken down. I say they were always asinine. The FBI just realized this guy was not budging. They're able to use a hidden camera down this ventilation pipe, which is probably one of the two cameras that you see. They're long and kind of snake-like. They're able to see Jimmy Dykes holding a gun. And at this point, stun grenades are thrown into the bunker. There is an exchange of gunfire with Jimmy Dykes. He's killed, and Ethan Gilman is rescued. He is taken to an area hospital. He's reported to be in good condition. And according to multiple sources, there are at least 2 improvised explosive devices found inside this bunker. They describe one as being found inside PVC pipe, and then in one of the more official documents that's sort of included in the Wall Street Journal article, they describe it as being a PVC pipe bomb, which I'm not familiar with a PVC type pipe bomb. I'm familiar with steel and aluminum pipe bombs.
So I imagine it's a steel and aluminum pipe bomb that they used PVC pipe instead.
I think probably this was like a terribly made IED, or possibly it had been slid into the PVC ventilation pipe that they're talking through. And maybe that was just a mistake made from having seen a picture.
Right. Okay.
Now, according to all of this, talking about Ethan, the following week on February 14th, 2013, Dr. Phil has an interview with Ethan and his mother, Jennifer Kirkland. So Ethan had been in the Dale County, Alabama foster care system. And his mother, Jennifer Kirkland, had been raising him since he was 3, but she had substance use issues. And she comes on the air and tells a little bit about this. February 26th, the bunker where Jimmy Dykes had held Ethan captive, ended up being demolished by officials who stated that it posed a, quote, biological risk. I can only imagine that hard to clean it up. And there was, if you're in there for 5 days with a kid and you guys are eating food and whatever, there's bound to be no bathroom in this place, given the...
Not to mention, I mean, I feel like demolishing it was the correct thing to do. It shouldn't have been there to begin with, unless it was, again, for a natural disaster type shelter.
Right. And so Ethan Gilman, he goes with his mom to start with, but then Jennifer Kirkland begins using substances again, and he ends up being raised by his grandmother to a point, and then his 18-year-old brother when his grandmother passes away. He's finally adopted by a local minister and his wife named the Turners, and they had Ethan when he was a little toddler in foster care, and they end up with him again.
And that is one of the most heart-wrenching aspects of this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, did that kid really need to be taken by a crazy gunman?
No, he did not.
I would say that no kid needs to be taken. It just seems like it's just like the terrible rotten cherry on top, right?
Right. And there was a sixth anniversary like broadcast of this back in 2019. They showed Ethan. He has a new name now. He was a fifth grader at a local elementary school at the time. He would be about 17 now. One of the things that happened in the aftermath of all of this is there's the Charles Chuck Poland Act, and it makes it a crime to trespass onto a school bus, and it was signed into law in June of 2013, which I think is sort of the icing on the cake, because I believe a law making it from his crime, a law making a new crime that wasn't a crime previously would make Jimmy Dykes crazy if that came out of his actions.
It absolutely would. And it's always, anytime you have a law having to be, spelled out, put on paper and enacted and, become a law, when it's a principle of common sense.
Right.
Like, to begin with, you don't get on a school bus. Like,
Right.
It's trespassing. Whether, I'm sure nuances of the wording of other laws perhaps didn't allow for that to be considered, right?
Yeah.
But it is always just the height of stupidity
Right.
that ends up putting things like that into place, right?
Yeah, it is.
And I think that, I'm glad that they honored Chuck Poland. He was a hero for
right.
saving all those children. And I'm glad that they did something that would have aggravated Dykes, because he was going about everything the wrong way.
Yeah. But yeah, this is our first holiday episode. The theme this year is hostage taking. Do you have anything else on this particular case?
No, I don't. I feel like it turned out the exact way it should have been. And I hope that Chuck Poland's resting in peace.
Yeah.
And I hope that the child we don't know his name now. We wouldn't probably use it anyway, but I hope that he's doing well and prospering.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that everybody else, all the small children involved, survived, and I hope they've all recovered from it.
I do too.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS. True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at truecrimeaccess.com. Thank you for joining us.